Imagine your paycheck lands on Friday. You know exactly where it is going. Rent, car payment, groceries, phone bill. A subscription you forgot to cancel. Minimum payment on the credit card. You have mapped the route in your head before the money even touches your account. And then one thing breaks. Not a dramatic collapse, not a market crash, not a Wall Street scandal, just a tire, a dental bill, a higher utility charge, a few missed hours at work, something small enough to sound ordinary, but large enough to push the whole month out of balance. What happens next is not simple, because most people do not go broke all at once. They go broke in layers. First, the savings account gets touched. Then, the credit card carries a balance. Then, the minimum payment becomes part of the monthly bills. Then, interest starts eating tomorrow's paycheck before tomorrow even arrives. And the strange part is, the danger often begins on the most normal day of your life. You buy lunch because you are tired. You tap your card because it is easier. You split one purchase into 4 payments because it feels lighter. You tell yourself it is not a big deal because each decision is small, but the machine does not care that the decisions were small. The machine adds them together. A $12 lunch is not just a $12 lunch if it keeps you from paying the full balance. A $40 subscription is not just a subscription if it survives for 2 years unnoticed. A $300 emergency is not just an emergency if it turns into a revolving balance at 24% interest. This is the part nobody likes to say out loud. Your paycheck may not be yours in the way you think it is. A large share of it may already belong to your landlord, your lender, your insurance company, your phone provider, your credit card issuer, and every company that learned how to turn convenience into a monthly drain. Not one trap, not one villain, but a quiet chain of obligations. That makes income look bigger than it really is. Then, the data makes it feel colder. Surveys from the Federal Reserve have repeatedly shown that many American adults would struggle to cover a $400 emergency with cash or savings. Credit card balances have climbed past $1 trillion in the United States. Delinquencies have been rising, especially among younger borrowers, and wage growth, even when it looks good on paper, can disappear fast when rent, food, insurance, and debt payments move faster. So the real crisis is not that people are careless. Maybe they are tired, maybe they are underpaid, maybe they were never taught how expensive it is to be one bad week away from borrowing, because when you have no buffer, every bill becomes weather, every due date becomes pressure, every surprise becomes a storm. Our ancestors feared the rainy day because it could stop the hunt, flood the shelter, and kill the fire. Modern people fear the rainy day because it can arrive as an overdraft fee, a declined card, a medical invoice, or a balance that keeps growing while they sleep. And that is why this matters. The question is not whether you make enough to survive a normal month. The question is whether your money can survive an abnormal one. So be honest in the comments. If a $500 surprise hit your life this week, would you pay it with savings, a credit card, or panic? Then the water gets in. Not real water, not a storm you can see through the window, but the kind that comes through a checking account on a Tuesday morning when rent has cleared, the phone bill is pending, groceries are higher than last week, and your paycheck is still 2 days away. That is where the first trap appears. Most people think the danger is being broke, but that is not quite it. The danger is being illiquid, having money on paper but not having it. At the exact hour the system asks for it, your salary may be coming, your tax refund may be coming, your side gig payout may be coming, but the landlord does not wait for coming. The bank does not wait for coming. The overdraft algorithm does not care that your life is technically fine by Friday. And the strange part is a single timing mismatch can change the price of your entire month. A $14 lunch is just lunch until it lands before payroll. Then it becomes an overdraft fee. A $60 utility bill is just a bill until autopay hits the wrong account. Then it becomes a late fee, a reconnection fee, maybe a credit score bruise that stays longer than the original problem. Not because you bought a yacht, not because you were reckless, but because the order of transactions moved against you. This is the quiet mechanism. The modern money system does not only charge you for what you buy, it charges you for being in the wrong position when the charge arrives. The Federal Reserve has reported for years that a large share of adults would struggle to cover a $400 emergency using cash or its equivalent. That number moves up and down, but the shape of the story does not. Millions of people are not one disaster away from financial stress. They are one calendar error away, one flat tire, one delayed deposit, one medical copay, 1 week where groceries, gas, and insurance all arrive in the same small window. Then comes the second pressure. Debt does not simply lend you money. It moves future income backward and then takes a toll each time it passes through the gate. A credit card with a balance at 22% APR is not just a card. It is a tiny machine sitting inside your wallet, repricing yesterday's dinner, last month's car repair, and that temporary emergency purchase every single day. Buy now, pay later looks softer, 4 payments. No interest, clean buttons, friendly colors. But if the payments stack across 5 apps, the paycheck has already been divided before it arrives. Maybe you still feel employed. Maybe your income looks normal. Maybe your friends would say, you are doing fine, but your money has already been assigned. This is where ordinary workers lose the thing that matters most. Not luxury, not status, not some fantasy of becoming rich overnight. They lose control over the next decision. And once that happens, the whole world compresses. The grocery store, the gas station, the credit card company, the landlord, the subscription service, the insurance company, the student loan servicer, all of them crowd into the same paycheck at the same time. Every one of them has a claim. Every one of them has a date. Every one of them gets paid before you get to ask what you actually wanted your money to do. That is why keeping a cash buffer matters more than people like to admit. It is not exciting. It does not look smart on social media. Nobody brags about 2 weeks of expenses sitting in a boring savings account. But that buffer is the financial version of keeping the fire alive, because starting over from zero is much harder than protecting a small flame you already have. If your account hits zero, you do not just lose money, you lose options. You may have to borrow at the worst possible rate. You may have to sell something at the worst possible time. You may have to accept a job, a shift, a loan, a fee, or a payment plan you would never choose. If you had even a little more breathing room, the cost of being short is not only the fee, it is the weaker negotiation position that comes after it. And this is why 2 people with the same income can live in completely different financial realities. One has $800 sitting untouched. Not much, not wealth, just dry ground. The other has the same salary, but no buffer. When the car battery dies, the first person pays and moves on. The second person puts it on a card, carries the balance, pays interest, loses next month's margin, and enters the next emergency already tired. Same income, different system. What happened was not simple. It was not just bad spending. It was a structure where small gaps became expensive, and expensive gaps became permanent. So the real question is not, do you make enough money? That question matters, but it is incomplete. The sharper question is this: how many days can your life continue if your paycheck arrives late? 3 days, 7 days, 1 month? Because that number tells you how much of your life is still yours. And if you want to test this quietly, do it tonight. Open your bank account. Look at every bill due before your next paycheck. Then ask one question. If the money came 5 days late, what breaks first? Comment the first bill that would hit you hardest. Then the paycheck lands, and for a few hours, everything looks alive again. The account balance is higher. The card payment can be made. The rent is not late yet. The phone bill is still connected. But the strange part is, for a lot of households, the first priority is not getting richer, not investing, not finding the perfect side hustle. It is keeping the financial fire from going out. Because once it goes out, everything gets colder very fast. A late fee becomes a higher balance. A higher balance becomes interest. Interest becomes a smaller paycheck next month. Then the overdraft fee arrives. Then the credit score takes a hit. Then borrowing gets more expensive. What happened was not simple. It was not one bad decision. It was a chain reaction built into the system. So when the rain hits, the job is not dramatic. Move the money deeper, separate the bill money before it can be touched. Put rent, utilities, insurance, minimum debt payments, and groceries somewhere boring and protected. Shield it from impulse spending, from weekend pressure, from that quiet little voice that says, maybe you can put it back later. Maybe next paycheck will be bigger. Maybe this month will be different. Feed it carefully. Not too much, not too little. If every dollar goes to debt, you may leave yourself with no cash and run straight back to the credit card. If every dollar stays liquid, the interest keeps eating in the background. The counterintuitive part is that survival money has to be balanced. A small emergency buffer can sometimes protect you more than an extra aggressive payment because it stops the next emergency from becoming new debt. That is not motivation talk. The Federal Reserve has reported for years that a large share of adults would struggle to cover a small unexpected expense without borrowing or selling something. Bank rate surveys have shown the same pattern from another angle. Many Americans cannot comfortably handle $1,000 emergency from savings. And those emergencies are usually not cinematic. They are tires, dental bills, a broken phone, a rent increase, a utility bill that quietly doubled after winter. This is where the hidden dry wood is. Most people look at income first, but during financial rain, the useful material is often buried inside the spending. Old subscriptions, delivery fees, insurance policies that were never compared again. Bank fees treated like weather. Credit card interest treated like a permanent tax. The dry wood is not glamorous. It is the part of the budget still protected under the canopy. The part you can pull out before everything is soaked. Then you split the wet logs. You take the messy bills apart. You separate the minimum payment from the interest. You separate the grocery need from the convenience habit. You separate transportation from status. You separate the house from the storage unit, the phone from the upgrade cycle, the child's needs from the guilt purchases around them. Inside a wet-looking month, there is often one dry piece of cash flow, not enough to change your life overnight, enough to keep the fire alive. And some tools burn better in rain. Automatic transfers, a separate checking account for bills, a high-yield savings account for the first emergency layer, calendar reminders before due dates, credit card alerts before the balance gets dangerous. These are not fancy, but they work because they do not depend on your mood. They sit there like birch bark in bad weather, ready to catch when everything else feels damp. In some households, one person's entire job during a rough month becomes guarding that financial fire, checking due dates, calling the utility company before the shutoff notice, moving the grocery budget before it leaks into takeout, making sure the insurance does not lapse, making sure the minimum payment clears, making sure the account does not fall below zero by $3 and trigger a $35 punishment. That labor is invisible, but it is real because that fire is everything. It is housing, it is transportation, it is food, it is heat. It is the credit file that decides what future emergencies will cost. It is also the emotional center of a household because money stress does not stay inside a spreadsheet. It enters the kitchen. It enters sleep. It changes how people talk to each other. And once you are mostly dry, there is another question. You still cannot leave the storm. So, what do? You make things. Not art for a museum. Not a dream business with a logo and a launch video. You make financial tools. You make a debt map. You make a bill calendar. You make a list of every recurring charge. You make a simple rule for raises, refunds, and bonuses before they disappear. You make one extra income experiment that can be repeated. You make a boring system that does not need you to be inspired every Tuesday. The record is clear in modern households too. People who track spending tend to notice leaks. People who automate saving tend to save more consistently. People who negotiate bills, refinance expensive debt when possible, or change repayment order often do not feel richer at first. They just stop bleeding as fast. And that is the point. The first victory is not abundance. It is not drowning. So here's the question I want you to answer honestly in the comments. If your next paycheck had to survive 30 straight days of rain, what is the first thing in your budget you would move deeper, shield, or cut loose? Then look at the small things. Not the mortgage, not the stock market, not the one big disaster everyone imagines. The small things. The coffee that went up by 70 cents. The delivery fee that used to feel invisible. The phone bill with 3 lines of taxes. And 2 services you forgot were added. The paycheck that arrives looking normal until rent, insurance, debt payments, subscriptions, groceries, and transportation take their turns. This is where the machine is built. Most people think wealth is lost in dramatic moments. A bad investment, a layoff, a medical bill, a market crash. Maybe that happens. Maybe it happens more than once. But for ordinary households, the quiet drain usually starts long before the emergency. It starts in the routine, in the automatic charge, in the minimum payment, in the small price increase that nobody argues with because life is already too crowded. And the strange part is, companies know this. They do not need you to make one reckless decision. They need you to make no decision at all. That is the mechanism. In finance, silence has a price. Inertia has a price. The subscription that renews while you are asleep. The credit card balance that carries over by default. The savings account that pays almost nothing because you never moved the cash. The retirement contribution that stayed at 3% for 7 years because nobody forced you to look again. This is not laziness. It is design. Behavioral researchers have studied this for decades. People tend to stay with defaults, even when switching would help them. In retirement plans, automatic enrollment can dramatically raise participation because the default becomes action instead of delay. But the same human tendency works against you everywhere else. If your default is to spend what remains, then nothing remains. If your default is to pay interest, interest becomes part of the landscape. If your default is to ignore bills because they are boring, the boring thing becomes the most powerful thing in your financial life. What happened was not simple. Prices rose. Wages did not keep pace for many people. Housing took a larger share of income. Cars became more expensive to buy, finance, repair, and insure. Food prices shifted in ways that made old grocery habits unreliable. At the same time, payment became frictionless. One tap, one click, one stored card, one monthly renewal. Money stopped feeling like paper leaving your hand and started feeling like a background process. That is why a paycheck can feel strong for one day and weak by the weekend. The numbers explain the feeling. A household can earn more than it did 5 years ago and still feel poorer if fixed costs expanded faster. A raise can disappear before it becomes freedom. A bonus can patch last month instead of building next month. A tax refund can feel like relief, then vanish into repairs, late balances, and delayed purchases that had been waiting in the dark. This is not survival anymore. This is production, but in the wrong direction. Every month, your financial life produces something. It either produces margin or it produces pressure. It either produces options or it produces obligations. It either builds a small cushion or it builds another reason to be afraid of the next bill. And most people never ask what their money system is manufacturing. They only ask why they feel tired. Look at credit cards. A card is not evil. It can be useful. It can protect purchases. It can earn rewards. But the moment a balance rolls over, the tool changes shape. It becomes a rent charge on your past self. At 20% interest, a purchase does not stay a purchase. It keeps working after you forget it. Dinner becomes a balance. A balance becomes interest. Interest becomes another line in the budget, and then the budget starts shrinking around it. Then look at subscriptions. One service is small, 5 are manageable, 12 become fog. Streaming, cloud storage, apps, gym access, delivery memberships, software, newsletters, children's games, old trials that became charges. None of them feel like a crisis. That is the point. A single leak does not look like a flood, but a dozen leaks can change the whole structure of a month. And then there is cash sitting still. This one feels safe. It feels responsible. Money in the bank. Money not spent. But if that cash earns almost nothing while prices rise, it is quietly losing buying power. Not visibly, not with a red warning light, just slowly. A dollar kept in the wrong place does not disappear. It becomes weaker. That is harder to notice and therefore easier to ignore. So the real question is not, can I afford this today? That question is too small. The better question is, what system does this create? Does this bill make next month tighter? Does this debt charge make future income smaller? Does this habit turn work into freedom, or does it turn work into maintenance? Does this account, this card, this plan, this purchase give you more choices later or fewer? Because that is the part nobody tells you. Money is not only counted, it is arranged. The arrangement matters. A person earning a modest income with clear rules, low debt, automatic saving, and controlled fixed costs may have more room to breathe than someone earning far more, but carrying payments on every corner of life. Income gets attention. Structure decides the outcome. Maybe the next rainy day is not about panic. Maybe it is about repair. Sit with the bank statement. Pull up the last 30 days. Not for shame, not for punishment, but to see the machinery. Circle the charges you forgot existed. Mark the payments that repeat. Find the interest. Find the fees. Find the places where your money leaves without asking you anymore. That is where the change begins. Not with a fantasy, not with a perfect budget, not with becoming a different person overnight, but with one small act of control, repeated until the system starts producing margin instead of pressure. And be honest in the comments. What is one monthly charge? You know you should cancel, but somehow it is still there. And this is where the story stops being about cutting back, because the obvious money advice is the practical stuff. Cancel one subscription, buy cheaper coffee, cook at home, use a budget app, check the electric bill, keep the receipts. These things matter. They are the rope, the tools, the bedding. They keep the household clean enough to function. But what comes next is something else entirely. The real mechanism is not the price of one coffee, not one streaming service, not one bad weekend. Purchase. It is the quiet design of modern cash flow. Money arrives in chunks, but spending leaves in drops. A paycheck lands every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. It feels large for a moment. Then the rent takes its piece. The car payment takes its piece. Insurance, phone, internet, groceries, gas, school costs, interest, delivery fees, subscriptions you barely remember. They do not arrive like one enemy at the gate. They arrive like rain through the roof. And the strange part is, most people do not experience this as poverty at first. They experience it as confusion. They look at the paycheck and think, this should have been enough. Then they look at the account 4 days later and feel like something invisible has been feeding on it. What happened was not simple. Over the last few decades, companies learned that the cleanest way to take money is not to ask for a big decision. It is to turn the decision into a background process. Monthly billing, automatic renewal, minimum payments, buy now, pay later, small service fees, dynamic prices, app tips, convenience charges, not one dramatic robbery, not one obvious trap, but a system built to make each payment feel too small to fight. A few dollars here does not scare you. $12 there does not feel like a crisis. A $6 delivery fee, a $9.99 trial, a $17 subscription, a $38 overdraft, a credit card balance carried for one more month. Alone, each one looks survivable. Together, they become a second rent. Researchers have found that people are much less sensitive to spending when the payment is abstract. Cash hurts. A card hurts less. One-click checkout barely registers. Automatic billing often disappears from awareness entirely. The transaction still happens. The pain just gets delayed, and delayed pain is expensive. That is why two people can earn the same salary and live in completely different financial worlds. One sees the money before it leaves. The other only sees the damage after it has gone. Maybe the difference is not discipline. Maybe it is visibility. Maybe the person who has money is not more talented, not more deserving, not born with some mysterious financial instinct, but simply has fewer silent leaks in the walls. This is why the ordinary bill has become one of the most important documents in modern life, not because it is exciting, because it tells the truth before your feelings can edit it. The phone bill tells you whether convenience has become normal. The credit card statement tells you whether last month is still charging interest today. The payroll slip tells you how much of your labor was taken before you even touched the money. The grocery receipt tells you whether inflation is a headline or a personal emergency. People think wealth begins with investing. Often, it begins earlier. It begins when you realize your money is not disappearing randomly. It is following channels that were built for it. And if you do not map those channels, someone else will. So here is the uncomfortable question. If you opened your bank statement right now, what small monthly charge would make you the angriest? Now think about what happens when 15 to 30 people are trapped in the same pressure system for days. Not in a cave, not around a fire, but inside the modern money cycle. A payroll deposit lands on Friday. Rent is due Monday. The electric bill is higher than last month. Groceries are up again. The car insurance renewal arrives with a number that looks almost insulting. And suddenly, people do what humans have always done when the environment gets tight. They talk at work, in group chats, in kitchens, in the car after the kids fall asleep. They compare numbers, they ask who got a raise. They complain about the landlord. They trade rumors about which bank is waiving fees, which credit card gives cash back, which side hustle is still worth the time, which grocery store quietly raised prices again. And the strange part is this: most people do not learn money from a textbook. They learn it socially. They learn it through fragments, through warnings, through someone else's mistake, through a cousin saying, "Do not finance the car that way," through a coworker whispering, "They are underpaying you," through a parent repeating an old rule that may have saved them once, but may now be slowly hurting you. Anthropologist Polly Wisner saw something ancient that explains this modern behavior. In 2014, she published research on conversations among the Juhohansi in the Kalahari. During the day, people talked about practical problems, land, resources, complaints, things that had to be handled. But at night, around the fire, more than 80% of the conversation shifted. Stories, songs, ceremonies, explanations. The fire changed the room before there was a room. It softened faces. It lowered tension. It made people less defensive. And what looked like storytelling was not entertainment in the small sense. It was a transmission system. The campfire was not just warmth, it was the first network. And what moved through that network was survival knowledge. Where water dried up in summer, which plants were safe. Where the good stone was, how to follow the tracks of a specific animal. Not gossip, not noise, but information that could decide who made it through the next season. Now replace water with liquidity. Replace edible plants with safe financial products. Replace flint deposits with job openings, tax credits, refinancing windows, high-yield savings accounts, cheap childcare, rent-controlled apartments, employer benefits, and the one person in your circle who actually knows how a 401k match works. The mechanism is the same. Money knowledge does not spread evenly, it clusters. It sticks to families, workplaces, neighborhoods, and social circles. One group knows how to negotiate salary because someone showed them the script. Another group thinks the posted offer is the final number. One family treats credit cards as tools. Another treats them as emergencies. One household knows that autopay can protect your credit score. Another discovers too late that one missed bill can cost them more than the original purchase. This is where the counterintuitive part begins. Your income matters, but your information environment may matter more than you think. A person earning a decent salary can still bleed money if the only financial stories around them are panic, secrecy, and bad debt. Another person earning less can move differently if they are surrounded by people who casually discuss raises, benefits, taxes, index funds, insurance, and scams before those mistakes become expensive. Not because they are smarter, not because they are morally better, but because the right warning reached them before the bill did. And companies understand this better than most households do. That is why subscriptions are designed to feel small. Why only $9.99 sounds harmless, until it becomes a quiet stack of monthly claims on your paycheck. Why buy now, pay later splits the pain into pieces. Why credit card minimum payments make debt look manageable, while interest keeps working in the background. Why banks and apps use notifications, colors, rewards, points, streaks, and frictionless buttons. They are not just selling products. They are shaping the stories you tell yourself about spending. Maybe it is not really debt. Maybe it is flexibility. Maybe it is not a fee. Maybe it is convenience. Maybe it is not lifestyle inflation. Maybe it is self-care. Maybe it is not financial stress. Maybe everyone lives like this. Then the statements arrive and the story becomes arithmetic. This is why the details on a pay stub or a bill are not small details. The taxes withheld, the health insurance deduction, the retirement contribution that never started, the employer match left on the table, the interest line on a credit card statement, the service fee buried under the phone bill. These are not boring administrative leftovers. They are tracks in the dirt. They show where your money is going. They show who is feeding from it. They show whether your labor is turning into assets or just passing through your hands on its way to someone else's balance sheet. There is another uncomfortable lesson from old oral traditions. Some stories lasted for thousands of years because they carried useful information. Australian Aboriginal stories have been matched to sea level changes from roughly 7,000 years ago. Think about that. A memory survived without paper, without servers, without spreadsheets, because people kept telling it in a form others could remember. Modern money has oral traditions too. Some are useful. Always get the match. Never co-sign unless you can pay the whole debt yourself. Read the bill, line by line. Ask what the person next to you is being paid. But some stories are dangerous. Renting is throwing money away. Debt is normal. Investing is only for rich people. I will start saving when I make more. These lines get passed around like wisdom, but sometimes they are just inherited financial weather. They feel true because they are familiar, and familiar can be expensive. So when people say personal finance is personal, they are only partly right. It is personal at the moment of payment. But before that, it is social. It is cultural. It is whispered, modeled, avoided, exaggerated, shamed, and repeated. Your money decisions are not made in silence. They are made inside a circle of stories. And if you do not examine that circle, you may spend your whole life obeying financial rules that no one ever proved. So here's the question. What is one money belief you grew up hearing that you now think might have been completely wrong? And this is where the phrase rainy day fund becomes stranger than it sounds. Because a bad month is not just a bad month. Not this empty period, not this pause, not this dead space between paychecks, but a moment when your real financial system becomes visible, when the overtime disappears, when the card minimums are still due, when the rent hits on the 1st, the insurance hits on the 5th, the phone bill hits on the 9th, and the groceries quietly take whatever is left. That is when the tracks appear in the soft ground. You can see where your money has been walking. You can see which expense passed through last night, which subscription has been feeding for 6 months, which small habit is moving faster than you thought, and which bill was always waiting ahead of you. In a normal month, everything is hard pavement. The paycheck lands, the spending spreads out. The evidence dries before you can read it. But under pressure, the marks get deep. And the strange part is, this is exactly when most people look away. They call it stress. They call it being broke. They call it bad luck. Maybe it is. Maybe the car repair was real. Maybe the medical bill was real. Maybe the hours got cut. There was nothing heroic to do about it. But the mechanism underneath is not emotional. It is structural. A household with no buffer is forced to buy money at the worst possible moment. That is what credit cards are. That is what overdraft fees are. That is what payday loans are. Not income, not rescue, but expensive time. The Federal Reserve has reported for years that a large share of adults would struggle to cover a modest emergency expense in cash. Other surveys keep finding the same thing in different words. Millions of people are not failing because they do not work. They are failing because the timing of life is stronger than the timing of wages. The bill does not care when you get paid. The landlord does not wait because your next deposit comes Friday. The utility company does not lower the balance because groceries were expensive this week. And a bank fee can appear not because you spent wildly, but because the order of transactions turned against you. What happened was not simple. The old advice says, save for a rainy day, but that makes the rainy day sound rare. A distant storm, a moral test, something that happens to other people who were not careful enough. But for ordinary workers, rain is seasonal. It comes when hours drop. It comes when prices rise before wages do. It comes when a child needs shoes, when the fridge breaks, when the annual insurance renewal arrives in the same week as rent. And if you have no stored water, every storm becomes a negotiation with someone who profits from your urgency. That is why the first $1,000 is not just a number. It is not wealth. It is not freedom, but it changes the food supply. It changes the terrain. It lets you pay the mechanic instead of financing the repair at brutal interest. It lets you buy groceries before the card balance becomes a trap. It lets you say no to the fee. No to the cash advance. No to the tiny emergency that grows teeth overnight. Then the rainy day becomes useful. Not pleasant, not easy, but useful. Because once the panic is lower, you can study the pattern. You can mark which bills are fixed, which ones are pretending to be fixed, and which ones are quietly optional. You can see whether the problem is spending, income, timing, or debt service. Those are 4 different animals. And most people hunt the wrong one. Cutting coffee will not fix a rent problem. A second job will not fix a subscription leak if the extra money vanishes without a plan. A budget will not fix a payday mismatch unless the due dates move. And paying only minimums will not fix debt if the interest rate is eating faster than the payment can work. So the real advantage is not just having money. It is knowing what the storm reveals. Some families use a bad month to build a 1-page bill calendar. Some call lenders and move due dates away from rent week. Some split each paycheck into rent, food, transport, debt, and buffer before the money ever touches the spending account. It is not glamorous. It does not look like getting rich, but it is how a household stops being hunted by timing. A rainy period does not stop the money supply. It changes it completely, and the people who understand that change survive differently from the people who only blame the rain. So here is the question. When your last financial storm hit, what did it reveal first? Your income problem, your spending problem, your timing problem, or your debt problem? Everything that mattered was not decided on payday. It was decided after the money arrived. In the quiet part, after the rent left, after the phone bill hit, after the card payment pulled from the account while nobody was watching. That is where most people lose control of their money. Not in one dramatic mistake, not in one reckless weekend, but in small ordinary leaks that look too boring to question. A subscription renewed, a delivery fee doubled, a credit card balance carried 1 more month, a raise absorbed into a slightly more expensive life. Then the paycheck comes again, and it feels like a reset. But it is not a reset. It is a loop. And the strange part is, the richest financial change often starts in the dullest hour of the week. The hour when you sit down and look at the account. The hour when you cancel the thing you forgot you were paying for. The hour when you move money before you can spend it. The hour when you decide that the next rainy day will not be handled with panic or a credit card or a desperate transfer from someone else. What happened was not simple. Prices rose, interest rates rose. Rent took a larger bite. Groceries stopped feeling normal, and for many people, the paycheck did not fail all at once. It just became smaller in the places that mattered. The Federal Reserve has reported for years that a large share of adults would struggle with an unexpected $400 expense. Credit card interest has sat at levels that can quietly turn last month's groceries into this year's burden. This is not theory. This is the machinery running underneath daily life. So the action is not glamorous. Keep the fire alive. Build the emergency fund before you build the lifestyle. Make the transfer automatic. Review the last 30 days of spending like it is evidence. Cut 1 recurring charge, lower 1 bill, pay down the most expensive debt first. Keep a short list of what must be protected. Housing, food, transport, insurance, cash buffer, income skills. Not status, not impulse, not whatever the algorithm convinced you to want at midnight. Maybe your next raise does not need to become a better apartment. Maybe your next bonus does not need to become a vacation. Maybe your next quiet Sunday is not empty time at all. Maybe it is the place where your future gets built, because money does not usually change when life is exciting. It changes when nothing is happening, and you choose to prepare anyway. Every automatic deposit, every avoided interest charge, every negotiated bill, every boring review of a bank statement, all of it comes from the hours most people throw away. That is the final judgment. If your money has no job before it arrives, the world will give it one after it lands. And the world is very good at collecting. So before the next paycheck hits, decide where it goes. Before the next bill arrives, decide what stays. Before the next emergency appears, decide whether you are going to meet it with cash or with fear. And now, I want to know this. What is one expense in your life that looks small, but quietly drains you every month?